You may think of sand as part of your beach vacation, but it's used for more than just sandcastles. It's a commodity like oil and copper and gold. It's a pretty crucial commodity, and even though sand can be found in nearly every single country on Earth, we could soon face a sand shortage.
Meow, I'm Huples cat. With everything else going on right now.
It's disgusting.
Off the top at 6, a shocking and just sickening sight on South Beach. A man caught on camera touching himself inside a busy Starbucks.
A comet that is 16 miles wide could be heading towards Earth. 16 miles.
An earthquake rattling parts of Northern California.
Today in the Bay's Bob Riddell joins us live this morning. It was a 3.9, but certainly a reminder that the Bay Area were still at risk of that big one coming.
7.0 today on the Hayward Fault could kill hundreds of people in our area and cause billions of dollars in damage.
Why focus on sand? Am I spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt?
I'm your host, Joe, the creator of Balefire Outdoors on YouTube, and today we're going to talk about FUD and why it's so important to resist it. You've probably heard of the term FUD, F-U-D, before in terms of social issues, politics, things like that, but it's also got an important basis in the outdoors community, and it's really a negative thing across the board.
Yes, I probably am, but I do like to collect unlikely apocalyptic scenarios. This particular one should in fact take your mind off current events and increase your appreciation and understanding of the Earth and its importance of all of its creatures, not just humans.
Turns out, sand is only second to water as the most consumed raw material worldwide. Sand mining is the largest mining industry in the world, and yet it flies under the radar, largely unregulated and unknown.
Did you know that? Sand is used more than anything else on the planet Earth except for water. We use more sand by volume than we use fossil fuels. But running out? Come on!
Come on!
It's used in construction, like critical infrastructure. Sand is also used in chemical production, water filtration, fracking, and of course, glass. So all of your windows, computers, and cell phones.
A world without sand would be very different. But running out of it?
You can't be serious.
You cannot be serious!
You know, it's literally everywhere. We're driving on it, we're sitting in it, we're looking through it. It's absolutely extraordinary. And really starting to be concerned about what happens if we don't have this anymore.
Sand use around the world has tripled in the last 20 years. That's far greater than the rate that sand is being replenished.
The more I learned about it, the more alarmed I became.
Sand is everywhere. How can there be a shortage?
Actually, in some places, the world was running out, and it's such a hard concept to get your head around because you think of coastlines and expansive deserts and just see so much of it that to think of it not being there is very, very challenging.
And somewhat inconceivable. Is this FUD for FUD's sake? In this clip, I have Lawrence of Arabia reacting to the news that there's about to be a sand apocalypse.
One of the hard things with this topic that it's a problem that manifests in very different ways in very different places. So I bet you if you were in a community where sand mining is going on, like this is not a surprise to you at all.
Construction has caused a steep increase in demand for sand, and a lot of sand is being extracted from oceans and rivers.
Okay, I get it. So local exploitation is always going to be bad for the local environment. But are we really globally running out of sand?
Come on!
It's not just shortage in the market, it's shortage in the natural environment that has to be talked about. The concern is that there's literally not enough sand on coastlines in a context of rising sea levels and increased storms.
Yeah, okay, so ice melts, oceans rise, beaches go into deep water. I get that, but you know, I'm 800 miles here from the ocean, and because this used to be ocean lake floor, there's a lot of sand here. Now, oceanic and river and lake sand is really important because desert sand is windblown and it tends to be circular, it doesn't really stick together. So rough sand that's not circular actually sticks together better and makes an ideal base for concrete.
Hello, this is Louis. The cement truck just finished pouring. I'm super happy. Now he gave me a crazy idea that I might do. Now I'm thinking about probably doing a second level.
If you use desert sand partially or fully for the sand in concrete instead of oceanic or water-derived sand, what you get is concrete that's unstable and unsafe. Bearing in mind our world is absolutely, utterly dependent on massive amounts of concrete. Enough concrete is used every year on planet Earth to build a wall that's 89 feet wide by 89 feet tall, completely around the world. And we can build that every year by how much concrete we use. We're using a phenomenal amount of concrete. And when you think of concrete, bear in mind however much concrete you're using 10 times that amount of sand. So you're building a wall of sand around the Earth that's 890 feet wide by 890 feet tall every year.
And concrete is made up of 65 to 75% sand and gravel. Glass is about 70% silica sand. So there are very specific types of sand that are required for specific uses.
And that's the problem. We're using more and more certain specific types of sand for uses that we can't replace, and we're running out of it. Across the planet, it's leading to droughts, it's leading to ecological system failure, and it's leading to murder and mayhem. Whilst the video is really blaming unregulated extraction, it actually is more than that that's causing the problem. It's the amount of consumption that's the problem. For a lot of people across this planet, the only way to get a reasonable standard of living is to literally destroy their own ecosystem by digging up sand and selling it.
Even the production of silicon computer chips uses sand. But extracting sand can damage the environment.
Extractions of marine sand, coastal sand, beach is the worst. And rivers is something that is leading to tremendous environmental impact.
For oceans, well, imagine you scrape sand off the bottom of the ocean. That's going to affect the microorganisms that live in the ocean floor. That's going to affect the fish that eat the microorganisms, and then the fish that eat those fish. Basically, the sand removal affects an entire ecosystem.
CNBC actually mentioned the tragedy of the commons earlier in this report, and I've edited it out because it wasn't really a great explanation and it wasn't really appropriate where they put it in. So if you have small extraction and use of a raw material like sand, that's going to cause bad local effects. Okay, but there's a lot of sand. There's a lot of ocean. However, the method of extraction and the amount of demand for the extraction, the lack of regulation or control of the extraction, means that the tragedy of the commons is coming into place with sand, and people are encouraged, literally encouraged, to take more and more and more of it, and nobody's really being encouraged to limit the taking or the reuse of it. This continues where everybody jumps in and grabs sand to sell it until there's literally no sand left. The cows on the common land is a typical example people use. What they don't talk about in the tragedy of the commons is where the poop from the cows is going and what's happening in terms of how they're getting water. So there's a whole bunch of things. Once you start to consume in an unregulated, ever-increasing amount, exponential rise, I'm sure you remember that from COVID, it is really, really problematic because we will eventually just literally run out of sand. And while this is a reasonably far-off apocalypse, it is an entirely realistic and probable one.
Sand is the most extracted resource in the world by volume, surpassing even fossil fuels. Actually, even extracting oil and gas uses a lot of sand, like in fracking.
In 2019, we produced this report, which was submitted to the United Nations Environmental Assembly, and it was used for making a new resolution on global mineral governance, and it was adopted by all countries, and it was the first time that countries recognized that we have a problem with sand.
Solved! Just like human-caused climate change, the United Nations has done a fabulous job solving the potential sand apocalypse. Everything is fine. Of course, if you do look up, it may not look quite so fine. Now, they're saying that regulation and control globally is required. That is probably true. However you think about it, what they're talking about is reducing the amount of sand used so it becomes sustainable. And we're using massive amounts of sand now more than is sustainable. So what they're talking about actually is restricting growth, restricting the number of buildings and the types of buildings and all of the uses for sand that we have, restricting it by regulation and monitoring and environmental impact assessments, restriction, rationing. Rationing in a system that's depending on exponential growth to even maintain its own current level of awareness and ability to deal with things is a disaster. What I'm saying is deregulation is a terrible thing. Regulation in an economy that's dependent on exponential growth won't work. I am not optimistic.
This concept of panicking, it reminds me a little bit of Greta Thunberg talking about, I want you to panic.
I want you to panic.
When she was talking to the World Economic Forum, and they didn't quite go that far.
Panicking will never be a solution because we will need sand forever. It's something that we need a lot, so we need to be much wiser on the way we use the resource.
Much wiser generally. For example, a known problem like the sand apocalypse should have you acting and thinking now in 2020 to deal with a problem that probably won't really manifest until 2050 to 2100. If we wait till we run out of ecosystems that's habitable for humanity, if we wait till we've almost ran out of sand before we actually do concrete actions to deal with the problem, that's not wise, and it's not sustainable in terms of having a species that lives for a long time.
There's a very, very good correlation between the use of sand and cement. The UN estimates that 4.1 billion tons of cement is produced every year, and it takes roughly 10 tons of sand to create 1 ton of cement. Do the math, and
41 billion tons of sand and gravel.
Demand for cement is driven primarily by China, where construction is booming.
While it is fashionable in some quarters to blame the developing countries, it is unhelpful as they will not stop developing. We didn't, we aren't. Unless a war makes China use less concrete, that's not going to work to reduce sand use in China. But I would say a war is probably going to be worse than the sand apocalypse.
In the last 2 decades, the amount of sand that we've been using has been multiplied by 3. More than 58% is being used in China.
Part of the problem is some countries don't have regulations in place.
And then other countries like Canada, America and China buy unregulated sand. This is a global business issue.
Sand can't be extracted or sourced sustainably to meet demand from a world of 10 billion people. Finding alternatives to sand, including recycled materials, may help.
We can recycle concrete so that we're not wasting that by dumping these resources as a waste, because it's not a waste, it can be recycled.
That actually moves a lot of the video at this point. They talk a lot about regulation and collaboration and all of those millennial buzzwords that mean nothing because nothing will be done. We're still increasing the use of sand, we're still increasing the use of concrete. Whilst we could recycle concrete, it would take a huge amount of energy, which at the moment would have to come from fossil fuels to do so. I'm not altogether sure the solution is to just recycle and collaborate about what buildings are built where.
Sand is a finite resource. Every time we remove sand from the ecosystem, we are taking away critical habitat. We are taking away coastal security because the sand along the coast acts as a storm buffer. So when we extract sand, it comes at a cost, and this needs to be really, really balanced with the needs of future generations.
Well, I hope you found this interesting. I hope you'll try and conserve concrete where you can, and I hope you will get politically involved if you see extraction of sand in your local area. Just don't get murdered. This is a serious issue. You're taking away people's livelihoods, and it's all too easy for us in the West to say you can't build any more buildings and you can't do this and you can't do that because we already achieved what we wanted to achieve. The problem actually is about intelligence and thoughtful and planning on a global level for a problem that we can fix if we start today governmentally and with science, but I'm not optimistic we will. However, this, like most resource problems, isn't actually a problem of unlimited resources versus limited resources. The problem is population. The more people we have, the more we consume. The more individuals consume, the worse the problem is. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of people in African cities and in Indian cities that are going to need and demand and ethically should be getting concrete as their cities develop and their needs for other things like power and fossil fuels increases. We have a problem. We're heading towards 10 billion people on this planet by 2050 unless something happens, and we've got a problem. We haven't figured out how to give more than a third of the people at best a decent standard of living. The other 2/3 don't have a great standard of living, and they're always going to want that standard of living. And having an underclass like that means we're basically a slave society without chains. We use economic chains called debt. Doodles! This has been Paradise Terrier Productions 2022.